Have you ever signed something that changed your life without even knowing it? Aria Collins had 3 seconds to decide. 3 seconds that would expose a truth about who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. She didn't know it yet, but the signature she was about to write would become the most inspirational moment of her life and the most terrifying. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the executive conference room at Northwell Systems gleamed under fluorescent lights. Aria, a shy girl who'd learned to make herself invisible, moved quietly between leather chairs with her cleaning cart. The marble floors beneath her feet cost more than she'd earn in a year. This building was where decisions were made about people like her, but never with her. Executives left behind coffee rings and notes about quarterly projections. She left behind the scent of lemon cleaner and no trace that she'd ever existed. Karen Whitmore appeared in the doorway, heels clicking like a countdown. Operations manager. The woman who decided who stayed and who became just another name in a termination file. "You're behind schedule again." Aria's hands tightened on her spray bottle. "I'm sorry. My daughter has a fever, and I had to call home to check on her, but I promise I'll finish. Sign this." Karen placed a document on the conference table. Dense legal text, words that blurred together. "New liability protocols, standard procedure." Aria glanced at the clock. Lily was home with a neighbor who charged by the hour. Every minute of hesitation cost money she didn't have. Her hand moved across the paper. 3 seconds that felt like a lifetime. Karen collected the document without making eye contact. "Finish your shift." But as Aria turned to leave, something caught her attention. The conference room screen was still on, displaying a security dashboard. A blinking red alert she recognized from her previous life, back when she'd worked as an office assistant before the layoffs, before people decided she was no longer useful. She reached toward the mouse, then stopped. She'd just signed something. She didn't even know what it said. And in this building, ignorance could cost you everything. What this shy girl didn't realize was that Karen had just made her legally responsible for a catastrophe that hadn't happened yet. By morning, everyone would know Aria's name, but not for any reason she could have imagined. The document Aria signed wasn't protection, it was a trap, and she'd just walked straight into it. Aria left the conference room with that signature burning in her mind, like a warning she couldn't decode. She pushed her cart down the hallway past offices where ambitious professionals had abandoned half-eaten salads and motivational posters about innovation. Her phone buzzed. "Mrs. Chen, the neighbor, Lily's temperature is a 101. Should I give her more medicine?" Aria's chest tightened. She typed back with trembling hands. "Yes. I'll be home by midnight. Thank you so much." The break room was empty when she arrived, just a flickering overhead light and the persistent hum of an old refrigerator. The insurance card in her wallet felt suddenly fragile, as if one wrong move might make it disintegrate. Rough night. Helen Moore stood in the doorway holding 2 paper cups of tea. She was 67, worked the late reception shift, and had the kind of eyes that saw through every wall people built around themselves. "I'm fine," Aria said reflexively. Helen sat down and slid 1 cup forward. "We all say that when we're anything but fine." After a moment of silence, Helen asked, "Who do you apologize to the most in your life?" "Everyone, I guess. It's just polite." "No." Helen's intensity made pretending impossible. "You apologize because you're trying to survive. There's a difference between being kind and erasing yourself one sorry at a time." "I don't know how to be any other way," Aria whispered. Helen squeezed her hand briefly. 20 years ago, I was exactly where you are. Single mother, laid off. I learned to apologize for existing." She paused. "I'm still learning to stop." Aria's phone buzzed again. Lily's voice. "Mommy, my throat really hurts. When are you coming home? The sound made something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but opening. I need to finish up, Arya said, standing quickly. Helen nodded. Go take care of your girl, but Arya, whatever that paper was, Karen made you sign tonight. Be careful. That woman doesn't do anything standard without a reason. Arya completed her remaining tasks, but Helen's words followed her like shadows. That security alert kept blinking in her memory. She'd seen this exact error before 6 years ago at another tech firm. It was a device privilege error, the kind of vulnerability that could open doors meant to stay locked forever. She should report it. But she'd just signed a document she didn't understand, filled with confusing legal language. And pointing out problems only transformed you into one. By 11:30, she stopped outside the dark conference room. The dashboard still glowed through the glass walls. She glanced around at the cameras didn't cover this corner. She slipped inside. The error was still there. Device ID 7743, contractor access, elevated privileges, expiration none. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could send an anonymous report, but it would log which terminal generated it. If she was wrong, she'd be flagged for touching unauthorized equipment. If she was right, that paper she'd signed would make her personally liable. Karen's voice echoed standard procedure. Arya thought of Lily asking when Mommy would come home. She thought of Helen's words about apologizing for existing. She stepped back and let the screen fade to black. Some battles weren't worth fighting when you had a 5-year-old who needed you alive, employed, and insured. She left the building at 11:47 p.m. Behind her, the error kept blinking like a time bomb no one would see until it was too late. By morning, that silence would cost her everything she'd been trying to protect. The security breach that would destroy Arya's life was already in motion, and her fingerprints were about to be all over it. The call came at 6:42 a.m., shattering what little sleep Arya had managed. Ms. Collins, this is Gregory from Human Resources. We need you to come in today at 9 o'clock. There's been a significant incident. Her blood turned to ice water. I don't work day shift. I can't just do on 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. The line went dead before she could ask what kind of incident required a night janitor during business hours. Lily tugged at her sleeve with worried eyes. Mommy, you look really scared. Arya forced her face into something resembling calm, though her hands shook. That paper, that screen, that error she'd left blinking in the dark. Northwell Systems looked completely different in daylight, welcoming under morning sun, filled with confident people carrying expensive coffee. Arya had never felt more out of place. The security guard redirected her. Main lobby today, ma'am. HR's expecting you. She'd never used the main entrance during business hours, never ridden the elevator alongside executives who looked through her as if she were made of glass. The Human Resources office was all blonde wood and calming neutral colors. After 40 agonizing minutes, a man in an expensive suit appeared. Ms. Collins, I'm Richard Chen, Legal Department. Please come with me. They walked to a small conference room. Karen was already there with an expression of cold satisfaction. And at the head of the table sat Brennan Cole, CEO, 35 years old, worth more money than Arya could conceptualize. Please sit, Ms. Collins, Richard said. Arya sat. Her heart hammered violently. Are you aware that there was a major security breach last night? Richard began. A contractor's device accessed highly restricted files, client data, financial records, proprietary information. He paused deliberately. The breach originated from the executive conference room, during your shift. Karen's voice cut through the air. You were the only unauthorized person in that room after 9 p.m. I didn't touch anything, Arya said, her voice too small. I only cleaned. Richard slid a document across the table, the one she'd signed. This liability waiver makes you personally responsible for any security issues during your shift. It states clearly that you accept full responsibility for reporting any unusual activity. He looked at her with practiced patience. Did you notice anything unusual, any equipment problems or security alerts? She had. God help her, she had. Her voice disappeared. Did you or did you not observe anything unusual? This was the moment she'd been terrified of her entire working life. Tell the truth and admit she'd seen a critical problem but stayed silent, or lie and pray they'd never discover what she knew. I'm sorry, she whispered. Karen made a small sound of vindication. I'm sorry, Arya repeated, hating herself for it. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. To what? Brennan spoke for the first time, his voice quieter than she'd expected. You didn't mean to what, exactly? I didn't mean to be a problem, she whispered. Something shifted in his expression. Why do you keep apologizing? The question hung in the air. Because... Arya's throat closed. Because I'm replaceable. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Brennan went completely still. For 3 full seconds he didn't move. Then something in his face cracked a flash of recognition or understanding that came from somewhere deeper than this moment. Everyone take a 15-minute break. Ms. Collins, please wait outside. Arya sat in the hallway, pressing her palms against her eyes. Through the glass wall, she could see them talking. Karen gesturing aggressively. Brennan sitting motionless, staring at something invisible. Helen appeared beside her, holding terrible tea. I heard what happened. They think I caused a security breach. Arya's voice broke. I'm going to lose everything. Did you cause the breach? No. But I saw something wrong and didn't report it. I was scared. The confession poured out. I signed that paper because Karen told me to. I stayed quiet because that's what people like us do. Except now, Lily's going to pay for my cowardice. People like us, Helen repeated thoughtfully. There is no us and them. There's just people. Some who've learned they matter, and some who haven't learned it yet. Through the glass, Brennan stood abruptly. He said something sharp to Karen, shook his head with barely controlled anger, then walked out. He looked directly at Arya. Miss Collins, I need you to tell me something, and I need the complete truth. Not an apology. Not what you think I want to hear. The truth. Arya stood on shaking legs. That security error you saw but didn't report. Brennan said, his voice steady and certain. Describe it to me. Everything you remember. Every detail. Her mind went blank with panic. How did you know I... Because I reviewed the security footage from last night. You stood at that screen for 37 seconds. You clearly saw something that concerned you enough to stop and examine it. Now tell me what it was. What Arya was about to say wouldn't just save her job, it would expose a system designed to protect people like Karen and sacrifice people like her. Arya's hands trembled violently. Everyone was staring. Karen with cold calculation. Richard with professional suspicion. Helen with quiet encouragement. And Brennan with piercing eyes that seemed to see through every apology she'd ever made. I saw a device privilege error, she said barely above a whisper. Device ID 7743, contractor access with elevated privileges, no expiration date. The hallway went silent. Richard stepped forward. How would you even know what that means? That's technical security language. I worked as an office assistant once, 6 years ago. They trained me on basic security protocols before they restructured and decided they didn't need me anymore. I recognized the error immediately. Karen's voice dripped with skepticism. And you expect us to believe you just happened to notice this? I noticed it because it was wrong, Arya said, her voice strengthening. The screen was still logged in. I've seen that exact error before, and I knew what it meant. Then why didn't you report it? Richard demanded. Arya looked directly at Karen. Because 3 hours before I saw that error, you made me sign a paper I didn't understand. Dense legal language designed to confuse. You called it standard procedure. Her voice grew steadier. When I hesitated, you told me I should have read it more carefully. I was scared. Because people like me don't get second chances. We get terminated. That's absurd, Karen said flatly. The waiver was routine. Let her finish. Brennan's voice cut through like a scalpel. Arya took a shaking breath. I knew anonymous reports log which terminal they originate from. My login. If I was wrong, I'd be written up for touching unauthorized equipment. If I was right and something went wrong. She looked at the paper. That waiver would make me personally liable. So you chose to stay silent, Brennan observed. I stayed silent because my daughter is 5 years old and has asthma, and our health insurance comes through this job. Arya's voice cracked. I stayed quiet because every night I clean rooms where people make decisions about cost reduction, and I know what cost gets cut first. I stayed silent because I'm sorry. She caught herself, the automatic apology. But this time she lifted her head. I'm sorry for believing I didn't matter enough to speak up. Karen's mask hardened. This is emotional manipulation. She saw the error, deliberately didn't report it, and now. When was the error created? Brennan asked suddenly. Richard checked his tablet. Last Thursday at 11:47 a.m. And when did the breach occur? Last night at 11:53 p.m.? Brennan turned to Arya. What time did you first see the error? So, around 11:30. And your shift begins at 9 p.m. Brennan looked at Karen, his expression ice cold. So this error existed for 3 full business days, through executive meetings, through strategy sessions. Dozens of people with actual security clearance were in that room. He paused. But somehow the night janitor is being held responsible. Karen's jaw tightened. She admitted she saw it and said nothing. Because you created a document specifically designed to shift legal liability onto the most vulnerable employees. Brennan's voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely furious. What exactly did you tell her that paper was for? Standard liability protocols during high security. We don't have standard liability protocols for cleaning staff. Richard's face had gone pale. That's not in any handbook. Where did this document originate? Silence. Karen. Brennan's voice could have frozen water. How many people have you made sign these papers? Karen's facade began to crack. Several employees over the years, in situations requiring clear accountability. Scapegoats, Helen said quietly from the doorway. Everyone turned. That's what you needed, wasn't it? People who wouldn't fight back. People who'd apologize for breathing too loud. Brennan stood very still. How many others like Arya did you silence? How many people saw critical problems and stayed quiet because you made them believe their survival was worth more than their voices? Karen's mask cracked completely. I did what was operationally necessary for this company's efficiency. Get out. Brennan's voice was steel wrapped in ice. I beg your pardon. Get out of this hallway. Richard, I want every document she's had anyone sign in the past 5 years, every liability waiver, every transfer of responsibility. He turned back to Karen with barely controlled fury. And I want the names of every person who signed them. Karen's face went white. You're making a catastrophic mistake. People, Brennan interrupted. They're people, not line items, not efficiency metrics. People. He looked at Arya. Ms. Collins, you're not fired. You're not being disciplined. And you don't owe anyone here another apology. Not ever again. But the truth Arya had spoken would uncover something far bigger than one manager's cruelty. It would reveal exactly how many other invisible people had been silenced, blamed, and erased from their own stories. The investigation took 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. Richard and his legal team pulled every document Karen Whitmore had created, modified, or implemented in 5 years of management. What they discovered wasn't just unethical, it was a systematic pattern of exploitation that had gone unnoticed, because the victims were people nobody thought to ask. 17 people had signed similar liability waivers. Maintenance workers who fixed things in the dark. Janitors who cleaned up after everyone else. Contract IT support brought in for overnight system updates. Night security guards who watched empty buildings. All people who worked when executives didn't. All people who'd learned that questioning anything meant risking everything. Arya watched the investigation unfold from a careful distance, still cleaning the same floors, still pushing the same cart. But something fundamental had shifted. People acknowledged her now in the hallways, remembered her name. One of the young programmers even held the elevator door and said, "Thank you for speaking up." That took real courage. She'd almost apologized for making him wait, but she caught herself in time. Said, "You're welcome," instead. 2 small words that felt like reclaiming stolen territory. Karen wasn't fired. The legal team explained that termination could expose the company to wrongful dismissal lawsuits. Instead, she was reassigned to a purely technical position in data analysis. No direct reports. No staff management authority. No power over anyone's employment or livelihood. She'd have to rebuild her entire career from the position she'd always believed other people deserved. The justice of it wasn't lost on anyone. On a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks later, Arya received an email requesting she come to Brennan's office. Her stomach still dropped when she saw his name in her inbox, but this time she didn't automatically assume catastrophe. She was learning slowly and carefully that not every summons was a punishment. His office was surprisingly modest for a CEO. Books on leadership and organizational culture lined the shelves. A photograph showed a younger version of himself standing outside what looked like a run-down apartment building. No yacht pictures, no golf trophies, no symbols of wealth disconnected from memory. "Ms. Collins." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please have a seat." She sat, but this time she didn't apologize for taking up space. "I've been reviewing your employment file in detail," Brennan began. "You worked as an office assistant before coming here. Data entry, scheduling, basic system monitoring, and security protocols." "Yes, sir, until they restructured their departments. I was part of the cost reduction. Position no longer aligned with operational needs." He finished reading from her file. He said the words like they tasted bitter. "A corporate language for, we stopped seeing you as a person worth investing in." Arya didn't know how to respond to that level of honesty. "I'm creating a new position in this company." Brennan continued looking at her directly. "Internal process monitor. The job is to review system failures and operational breakdowns, especially cases where frontline workers were blamed for problems they didn't create. To identify patterns. To ask the questions people are afraid to ask, because asking might cost them their jobs." He paused. "I'd like to offer that position to you." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I don't have a college degree." I'm not qualified for. You're the most qualified person I know, he interrupted gently but firmly. You saw what 17 other people with advanced degrees and security clearance missed. Not because you're smarter, but because you paid attention when nobody expected you to. You understood consequences that people with MBAs never considered, because those consequences would never touch their lives. He leaned forward slightly. You're qualified because you know what it feels like to be treated as replaceable. And that perspective is exactly what this company desperately needs. Arya thought of Lily, of Helen, of every night she'd cleaned in silence, believing she didn't deserve to have a voice that mattered. The position comes with day shift hours, Brennan added, comprehensive health insurance with dental and vision, and a salary that actually reflects the responsibility and value of the work. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you do this for someone like me? Brennan was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the city below. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more personal. When I started this company, I was 27 and completely broke. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously just to make rent. I cleaned office buildings at night. He turned back to her. Somewhere along the way to success, I forgot what that felt like. I started believing the systems we built were neutral, efficient, fair, and merit-based. His expression hardened slightly. You reminded me that systems aren't neutral. They're choices, and I've been choosing wrong for a long time. I don't know what to say, Arya whispered. Say yes, or say no, but don't apologize. A slight smile touched his face. You're not invisible, Ms. Collins. We just stopped looking. That's on us, not you. Arya took a deep breath. She thought of her daughter waiting at home. She thought of Helen's words about erasing yourself one apology at a time. She thought of all the people still cleaning in silence, still signing papers they didn't understand, still believing they were replaceable. Yes, she said clearly. I accept. And for the first time in years, she didn't follow it with an apology or a qualification or an excuse. Just yes. Just acceptance of something she deserved. The word felt like freedom. 3 months later, Helen Moore walked into Human Resources and submitted her retirement paperwork. She'd worked at Northwell Systems for 12 years. Before that, other buildings, other companies, other versions of the same story repeated until the words lost meaning. Always polite, always invisible, always replaceable, or so she'd been taught to believe. Until now. The company organized a small retirement gathering in the same break room where she'd once handed Arya a cup of terrible tea and asked her who she apologized to most in her life. There were store-bought cookies from the cafeteria and a card signed by people who'd never bothered learning her name until recently. It was modest, imperfect, and more than she'd ever expected from a place that had never truly seen her. Arya found her afterward standing alone by the window that overlooked the parking lot, where both their cars sat side by side, 2 women whose stories had intersected at exactly the right moment. Thinking about what comes next? Arya asked gently. Helen smiled, and it was the freest expression Arya had ever seen on her face. Thinking about what I should have done 30 years ago, but was too afraid to try. She turned to face Arya fully. I spent my whole adult life staying quiet, apologizing for existing, making myself smaller and smaller so other people would have more room to expand. I told myself it was survival, and maybe it was, but it was also a kind of slow, disappearing one sorry at a time. You helped me stop disappearing, Arya said quietly, meaning every word. No. Helen's voice was firm and certain. You helped yourself. I just reminded you that you could, that you were worth the risk. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn notebook with years of entries. I kept records. Every time Karen made someone sign one of those papers. Every person I saw blamed for mistakes that weren't theirs. Every moment I wanted to speak up and didn't because I was afraid. She placed the notebook in Arya's hands like passing a torch. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Arya asked, though she already knew. "Your job," Helen said simply. "Find the other 17. The ones who signed papers out of fear. The ones still working here in silence, still believing they don't matter enough to be heard." She squeezed Arya's hand. "Tell them they were never replaceable. They were just replaced. There's a profound difference, and it's time someone explained it to them." Arya felt tears gathering but didn't try to hide them. "I don't know how to thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "Don't thank me." Helen's eyes were bright with emotion and purpose. "Just promise me something. When you meet someone who's apologizing for existing the way we both did for too long, you look them directly in the eye and you tell them you don't have to make yourself smaller. Not here. Not anymore. Not ever again." They stood together in comfortable silence. Two women who'd learned the same heartwarming lesson at different costs, in different decades, but at exactly the right time to help each other heal. "What will you do now?" Arya asked. "In retirement, I mean." Helen laughed, and it was the most joyful sound Arya had ever heard from her. "I'm going to take up space, lots of it. I'm going to speak up at town council meetings. I'm going to volunteer at the women's shelter and tell younger versions of us that they matter, that their voices deserve to be heard. I'm going to mentor young single mothers and teach them they don't have to apologize for needing help." She turned back to the window. "I'm going to live loudly for the first time in my life. I wasted enough decades being quiet." The parking lot stretched out below them, ordinary and endless and full of possibility. But Helen didn't look like someone leaving a job she'd outgrown. She looked like someone finally arriving at a beginning she deserved. "Thank you," Arya whispered, even though Helen had told her not to. "For seeing me when everyone else looked through me like I was invisible." Helen pulled her into a tight hug that felt like benediction and permission simultaneously. "I once stayed quiet too," she whispered back. "I'm so grateful you found the courage I couldn't. You saved more than just yourself, Arya. You saved everyone who comes after you." As Helen walked out of that building for the last time, Arya opened the worn notebook and saw 17 names written in careful handwriting. 17 people who'd been told they were replaceable. 17 people who deserved to know the truth. Her work was just beginning, but for the first time in her life she felt ready.